Hi, everybody. This is Nick Burbules. I'm a member of the International Academy of Education. This is another in a series of interviews with authors in the Educational Practices series, which is co-sponsored with the International Bureau of Education. These are a series of short booklets that are research-based and designed to illuminate fundamental issues of educational policy, educational practice, and we have a really outstanding example of this book, of this series, with the booklet from Maurice Elias. The title of this book is Academic and Social Emotional Learning, a topic that a lot of people are interested in these days. So let's get started. Maurice, thank you for joining us today.
No, it's my pleasure.
Okay, so you talk about basically two justifications for social emotional learning, the importance of it. One is that it promotes or supports academic learning, and that it is also important, social emotional learning is also important for other reasons. So let's talk about both branches of that justification. In what ways does social emotional learning help to support and strengthen academic learning?
Well, in recent years, we have learned that in order for people to learn effectively, they have to manage their emotions. You know, if you think for a moment about a school topic that you found very difficult, challenging, think about all the emotions that are engaged when you're doing that particular topic, whether it's algebra, whether it's chemistry, or for some people it's writing. There's anxiety, there is confusion, there is sometimes frustration, there is also sometimes great joy and accomplishment. And so, you know, for many years, it was assumed that when kids walked into the school, they took off their coats, put them in the locker, took their books, put them in the locker, took their emotions, put them in the locker. But now we know that's not true, that the emotions of kids are with them all the time. And they provide the gateway to whether or not the best curriculum material is going to be learned or not. And so, we just understand now that the task of academic instruction and the social emotional competencies that a person has are completely interrelated. And it's literally true at the biological level as well.
Yeah, that's very helpful. So some people, I have a former colleague who would say, well, this is kind of an instrumental justification for social emotional learning. It's important because it helps to produce something else that's important, which is namely academic learning. But in this booklet, you also argue that social emotional learning constitutes an important set of educational aims in itself and for its own sake. Can you say more about that?
Well, you know, I mean, this booklet has stood the test of time, but we've learned some things since. And one of the things that we've learned is that social emotional learning helps your valued outcomes to happen. It doesn't matter what those outcomes are. We have come to understand that social emotional learning is not something that was discovered. It's just a label for the set of skills that every one of us has from the moment of birth until our departure from this earth that enable us to get along in the world. So in a sense, these are the most instrumental of skills because they are what make everything possible. They determine and influence our interactions with other people, our social interactions, our family interactions, our workplace interactions, our leisure and sports interactions, and especially now, our civic interactions. So these skills are at the basis of many things. So one can say that it's beneficial to learn these skills for their own sake, but in reality, it's important to learn them for the sake of everything else. If I can just give you one brief analogy.
Yes.
It might make perfect sense for people to learn their alphabet, just to know the alphabet. But knowing the alphabet gives you the capacity to read and write extraordinary range of things. And that's exactly the same thing for social emotional competencies.
That's very helpful and extremely clear. Thank you. So the bulk of the booklet lays out some of the major components of social emotional learning. Do you want to talk with us about what some of the most important of those components are?
Well, social emotional learning sort of revolves around the basic and important skill of problem solving. And within problem solving comes a lot of things: the ability to know how you're feeling, to identify a problem, put a problem into words, know what your goal is in addressing something, thinking about your various options, connecting your options to potential consequences, and not just the consequences that you would like to have happen, but the range of possible consequences, and trying to think about, maybe something I'm not anticipating could happen. And then making a choice based on your goals, and then implementing it, carrying it out in the real world. So this is a whole set of skills that's very critical. And schools are a vital place to impart those skills, because this is where all the kids are, basically. And yet, all that being said, the first chapter in the book is called Learning Requires Caring. And that anticipates what a lot of more recent research has shown, which is that we have to be in the right environment in order to learn. We have to be in an environment that we perceive to be safe, that we perceive to be supportive, caring, kind, challenging, all those things. And so what we've learned is that this is a precursor to building social emotional competencies. You've got to provide the right environment. So this leads us to think about such things as, well, what is a kid's experience like walking into a school building? I work with a school, an urban school, 1,500 middle school kids, where they all had to pass through metal detectors to start their day. Well, let's just try to imagine how that prepares them for learning, how that gets them to feel like they're valued, how paradoxically it doesn't really reinforce their feeling safe. They don't experience a feeling of safety because they feel that they're guilty until proven innocent going through those metal detectors. So the book itself is organized around not only the development of these skills, but what is the right environment to produce so that these skills can be taught and learned effectively. That's why one of the sections talks about parents and the importance of involving parents to the extent possible in this process. We always say it's a cliche, but true, parents are the children's first teachers. They are very powerful influences on kids. I will say that research has shown that it would be incorrect to say that you can't teach these skills without parental support. That when children are in schools that literally from preschool through grade 12 emphasize these skills, they can develop these skills to a powerful degree, even if they're not being reinforced at home. Kids learn how to code switch, and they can bring these skills with them into college and careers if they have a very, very consistent experience in the school of having these skills be supported. And so the booklet reflects the fact that it's nice to say that skills are important, but we have to think about how to convey them. And some of the things, for example, like preparing your support staff. I mean, you can't just hand teachers a curriculum, no matter how good the curriculum is, and think they're going to just carry it out perfectly. I don't think any of us. Well, we've all had the experience of buying an appliance or furniture, and someone gives you this manual, and half the time you're lucky if you get something even moderately resembling what you're supposed to have. And that's the same thing is true in education. We can't just throw things at people. They need to understand. Why are we asking you to build children's social emotional competencies? Why are we asking you to do this during the academic day? Why will it, in fact, give you more instructional time if you help kids develop emotional management skills, even though you may have to spend some time to do that? All these things have been found to be true. And the guide anticipated a lot of what later research has confirmed.
Thank you for that. So let's talk. You talked a fair amount about the emotional component of SEL. Let's talk about the other component, which is related. They're not separate. The social and interpersonal dimensions of social emotional learning. What are some of the important educational goals to be working toward in that space?
Well, you know, as you said, these things can't completely be detached from one another. But one area is the area of perspective taking. Am I able to see the world through the eyes of the people around me? Am I sensitive to what they're experiencing? When they're experiencing discomfort, do I have enough knowledge to act with empathy? You know, the workplace of the future and the workplace of the present is a networked workplace. So much of what we do is in groups. And so the ability to work in a group, the ability to know how to step forward, how to lead, how to harmonize, how to bridge different opinions, how to accept feedback, how to give feedback, how to not only answer questions, but ask good questions. All of these are important SEL competencies that are part of the more social realm. And you know, we've done a lot of work recently integrating SEL into visual and performing arts. And one of the key linchpins of that connection is the fact that one can be an extraordinarily talented artist in whatever domain you might want to think. But in order for that work to get recognized and known and appreciated, your social skills matter. Your social relationships matter. And so this has become one of the standards now in arts education, that not only do you need to be able to produce art of a certain quality, you also have to be able to explain it, share it, and also be open to modification of it in response to others' reactions to it. So, of course, there's an emotional component to that, but this is also a very important perspective-taking component. And being able to see how the world is working, see how people are reacting to your behavior, and being able to make adjustments to that. So I think that's a particularly important element in the social aspect.
And that's great. So I'm a philosopher by training. When I hear talk about social emotional learning and a lot of the objectives that are under that rubric, it seems to overlap, not entirely, but overlap with what people in my line of work call moral education. But those words are often not used in the context of SEL. A lot of my students in my classes lately have done a lot of papers for me on the topic of SEL. And the more we talk about it, the more I think, how much of this is moral education under a different guise or under a different headline? What do you see as the relationship between the two?
Well, you know, it's apropos. When I first wrote this booklet, I was the director of the Social Emotional Learning Lab at Rutgers. Mm-hmm. But not long after, I changed the name of my lab to the Social Emotional and Character Development Lab.
Okay.
And our brand of SEL, what we think of as SEL 2.0, is Social Emotional and Character Development. Mm-hmm. And we could have also called it Social Emotional and Moral Development. Mm-hmm. So that was an option. But the idea here is that indeed, implicit in SEL has always been this idea that people are using it for good purposes.
Mhm.
And yet, just like the alphabet does not have to be used for good purposes, this set of social and emotional competencies that we have does not have to be used for good purposes. And so making explicit the character/moral dimension here becomes, I think, very important. Now, as a matter of, more than a technicality, the history of moral education and character education has often been a pedagogy of know the good, do the good. And the SEL world has instituted a sort of something in the middle. Know the good, do the good, if I know how to do the good.
Mm-hmm.
And so an understanding that many moral behaviors and moral labels can be broken down into a number of social and emotional skills, and that a person who doesn't act responsibly or even honestly may be dishonest or irresponsible, but also may have some skill issues with regard to those areas. And so I think social, emotional, and character development, or we might say the melding of social, emotional, and moral education, I think represents a positive advance on the field.
I like that way of putting them together. One last question. So at the end of your booklet, you talk about a really crucial question, which is, if these are important educational goals or objectives, how do we evaluate them? How do we evaluate the quality of student learning and development in this area? Obviously, certain models of evaluation, multiple choice tests or other sorts of exams, aren't going to work in this context. If this is important, we need to evaluate it. How do we evaluate social emotional learning?
Well, that's a question that would require a lot of time to answer fully.
Mm-hmm.
But let me just say that there is complete agreement about the importance of that question. And so there had been many competitions that CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning, has hosted around SEL assessments to encourage people to think about it in different ways. There are instruments like the Emotional Intelligence Inventory for Children, which has been used with well over 1 million children. There is the DESA, which is the Developmental Student Strengths Measure. That has been used with tens of millions of kids. So there are measures out there of this. That being said, and I will shamelessly say that I wrote a book fairly recently called The Other Side of the Report Card to address just this issue. We have long had on our American report cards anyway, sections about the behavior of kids. Comes prepared to class, works well in a group, and many things like that. The rationale for those things has never been clear, never been systematic. And we've been working with some schools to put SEL competencies in there that are observable, that teachers can see, that have developmental sequencing. So there are many ways that we can measure these skills. I think what we don't want to do is make the mistake that the IQ field had, which was to venerate a number. Mm-hmm. Because there is a panoply of SEL skills. They can be deployed in a number of different ways depending on context. We know that. You can be good with adults in SEL, but maybe not so good with your peers. So we don't want to reduce this down to a number. And yet that is what many of our educational systems respond to. So there is a tension in assessment. And that is to do things expediently or to do things thoroughly.
It is really an exemplary piece of work, Maurice, and thank you very much for sharing it with us, and thank you very much for discussing your booklet with us today.
No, I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.